Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the second day of the 4th International Conference on Sustainable Infrastructure and Built Environment 2022 is about to start. During the conference, we would like to kindly request you to open your cameras, mute the microphone, and use headsets or earphones for better sound quality. Thank you. The conference Zoom virtual background file will be available in the chat column. Kindly download and use the available virtual background and rename the Zoom account with the format institution_full name. In addition, please kindly fill in the attendance form provided by the committee in the chat column. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, kindly take your seats as the second day of the 4th International Conference on Sustainable Infrastructure and Built Environment 2022 will commence shortly. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Peace be upon you. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, allow me to extend our warmest greetings to our honorable speakers and guests. Our very warm welcome to His Excellency Dr. Insinyur Danis Hidayat Sumadilaga, MNSC, from the Ministry of Public Works and Public Housing, His Excellency Dr. Fuad Bendimerat, Executive Director of Earthquake Megacity Initiative, honorable partners of the conference, our honorable guests, professors, all delegates, presenters, participants, and all conference committees. A very good morning and welcome to the second day of the 4th International Conference on Sustainable Infrastructure and Built Environment 2022. First of all, let us thank God the Almighty who has given us the opportunity to attend this online conference in good health. The 4th International Conference on Sustainable Infrastructure and Built Environment is held in 2 days, 8th and 9th of March 2022. Yesterday, on 8th of March 2022, we participated in the first day of the 4th International Conference on Sustainable Infrastructure and Built Environment, an opportunity for engineers, researchers, and policymakers to discuss and learn more about the newest development in the implementation of sustainability in infrastructure, and to encourage building resilience in the built environment, in the present and the future. We have also gained some insights from our keynote speakers, Mr. Luhut Binsar Panjaitan, MPA, Coordinating Minister of Maritime Affairs and Investment, Professor Satoshi Okabe from Hokkaido University, and Professor Louis Ke from the National Taiwan University. During the plenary session for today, we invite all attendees to listen to our excellent keynote speakers, Dr. Insinyur Danis Hidayat Sumadilaga, MNSC, from the Ministry of Public Works and Public Housing, and Dr. Fuad Bendimerat, Executive Director of Earthquake Megacity Initiative. Today, let us have another round of fruitful discussions and gain more insights to build a more sustainable infrastructure and resilient built environment. I am Rizvika Rahmita Salim, and it is a great honor for me to be your master of ceremony for today's event. Ladies and gentlemen, before we continue our next agenda, let us begin with a photo session. All right, everyone, please open your cameras. Perhaps for those who still use your mask, maybe if you're not with other people in the room, you can also open it. Okay, on the count of 3, ladies and gentlemen. 1, 2, 3. Okay, we'll go to the next page. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, and yeah, and that's enough. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to inform you the agenda for today. The conference will be divided into 2 sessions. First of all, we are honored to have the opportunity to invite our keynote speakers for the second day plenary session, Dr. Insinyur Danis Hidayat Sumadialaga, MNSC, from the Ministry of Public Works and Public Housing, and Dr. Fuad Bendimerat, Executive Director of Earthquake Megacity Initiative. The 2 honorable keynote speakers will be attended by moderators from the academic staff of the Faculty of Civil and Environmental Engineering, Institut Teknologi Bandung. After the coffee break, we will have the 4th parallel paper presentation session until 12 p.m. Western Indonesian time. And after the lunch break, we will have the 5th parallel paper presentation session. And shortly after, we will have our closing ceremony. Ladies and gentlemen, I am sure that all speakers, presenters, and participants here are all excited to start the plenary session and to discuss together. So without further ado, let's start our main agenda, the first plenary session with our 4th keynote speaker, Dr. Insinyur Danis Hidayat Sumadialaga, MNSC, from the Ministry of Public Works and Public Housing. This session will be moderated by Professor Insinyur Indratmo, MSc, PhD. Before we begin, let me give you a brief introduction of our moderator. Professor Insinyur Indratmo, MSc, PhD, is a professor at the Faculty of Civil and Environmental Engineering, Institut Teknologi Bandung. He graduated from Institut Teknologi Bandung and obtained his master's degree and PhD degree at the University of Strathclyde, England. Other than being a professor at the faculty, he is also actively involved in the Water Resources Engineering Research Group, Institut Teknologi Bandung. Without further ado, I now invite Professor Insinyur Indratmo, MSc, PhD, to moderate the first plenary session. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Professor Insinyur Indratmo, MSc, PhD.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Good morning, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and all the participants of the conference. In this session, I will be the moderator of to this presentation. It is my great honor, really, to welcome all of you to our 4th International Conference on Sustainable Infrastructure and Built Environment 2022. This committee has decided to use the themes of the conference about challenges on sustainable and resilient infrastructure and built environment. On this second day of the conference, we are going to have the 4th keynote speaker. We are very lucky, really, in this occasion to have opportunity to present a speaker from a very competent and the most responsible in developing infrastructure in Indonesia. The speaker is Dr. Danis Hidayat Sumadialaga on behalf of the Minister of Public Works and Housing. Dr. Danis was born in Bandung, I think, on 28th October 1960. He was graduated from this institution from civil engineering, ITB. Right now, he is the chairman of Indonesia Association of Engineers, and also he was the general of Bina Karya. This is one of the part who responsible in housing development in Indonesia. In this occasion, he will present about sustainable infrastructure and built environment. Pak Danis, we invite you to present the speech, and the time available for you is about 30 minutes, and time is yours.
Baik, terima kasih Profesor Indratmo. Sebelum saya memulai, izinkan saya menyampaikan bahwa kehadiran saya di sini adalah mewakili Bapak Menteri PUPR yang semula pagi ini akan menyampaikan speech-nya secara langsung, namun tiba-tiba karena ada acara mendadak pagi ini, jadi menugaskan saya untuk menyampaikan speech beliau. Jadi Bapak Ibu sekalian, apa yang saya sampaikan ini adalah memang speech atau keynote yang disiapkan oleh beliau untuk disampaikan pada acara pagi ini. Jadi dengan segala hormat, saya mohon izin pada Bapak Ibu sekalian, allow me to represent the Minister of Public Work and Housing to give his speech. Bapak Ibu sekalian, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam, Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, salam kebajikan, selamat pagi dan salam sejahtera bagi kita semua. Yang saya hormati, Rektor Institut Teknologi Bandung, Profesor Reni Wirahadikusumah, PhD, atau yang mewakili, Dekan Fakultas Teknik Sipil dan Lingkungan, FTSL ITB, Bapak Edwan Kardena, para narasumber, pemakalah, Sivitas Akademika ITB, dan adik-adik mahasiswa generasi emas Indonesia, Bapak, Ibu, dan hadirin peserta International Conference yang berbahagia. Pertama-tama, izinkan saya mengiringi Bapak Ibu semua untuk memanjatkan puji dan syukur.
Mohon maaf, Pak Danis, kami tidak bisa mendengar suara Bapak. Ya, saya kembali ke Pak Indra dan Pak Danis ya. Pak Indratmo dan Pak Danis, terima kasih.
Baik, sekarang sudah? Mohon maaf, dari tadi belum ada suara jadi.
Sudah sekarang.
Baik, Bapak Ibu sekalian, sekali lagi mohon maaf saya ulangi bahwa kehadiran saya di sini adalah untuk membacakan speech yang disiapkan oleh Bapak Menteri. Mohon maaf, beliau tiba-tiba tidak dapat hadir langsung untuk menyampaikan speech sehingga menugaskan saya untuk menyampaikan speech-nya pada hari ini. Bapak, Ibu, hadirin yang saya hormati, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Salam, Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, salam kebajikan, selamat pagi dan salam sejahtera bagi kita semua. Yang saya hormati, Rektor Institut Teknologi Bandung, Profesor Reni Wirahadikusumah, PhD, atau yang mewakili, Dekan Fakultas Teknik Sipil dan Lingkungan ITB, Bapak Edwan Kardena, para narasumber, pemakalah, Sivitas Akademika ITB, dan adik-adik mahasiswa generasi emas Indonesia, Bapak, Ibu, dan hadirin peserta International Conference yang berbahagia. Izinkan saya mengiringi Bapak Ibu semua untuk memanjatkan puji dan syukur kepada Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, Tuhan yang Maha Esa, atas hidayah dan karunia-Nya sehingga pada hari ini Rabu 9 Maret 2022 kita semua dapat mengikuti acara Sustainable Infrastructure and Built Environment International Conference dengan tema Challenge on Sustainable and Resilient Infrastructure and Built Environment dalam keadaan sehat walafiat. Bapak Ibu hadirin yang saya hormati, Presiden Republik Indonesia Joko Widodo telah menetapkan visi Indonesia Maju tahun 2045 Untuk mewujudkan visi tersebut, tolong barangkali share screen-nya, izin. Untuk mewujudkan visi tersebut dalam periode 2019-2024, fokus pembangunan Indonesia yaitu pembangunan sumber daya manusia, pembangunan infrastruktur, penyederhanaan regulasi, penyederhanaan birokrasi, serta transformasi ekonomi. Pada tahun 2020-2021, dunia dihadapkan pada situasi pandemi COVID-19. Meskipun demikian, Kementerian PUPR terus melanjutkan pembangunan infrastruktur demi mendukung pemulihan ekonomi nasional. Pada tahun 2022 ini, Kementerian PUPR mendapatkan amanah anggaran pembangunan infrastruktur sebesar 100,6 triliun. Tugas dari Kementerian PUPR adalah membelanjakan uang negara tersebut secara akuntabel, transparan, efektif, dan efisien. Setiap rupiah yang dibelanjakan harus memberi dampak terhadap kinerja perekonomian. Sebagaimana pesan Bapak Presiden Republik Indonesia pada Hari Bakti PU ke-76 tahun 2021 bahwa ke depan kita harus lebih banyak membangun infrastruktur yang lebih berkualitas, yang smart dan ramah lingkungan, yang membuka akses dan meningkatkan keterhubungan antar wilayah, keterhubungan antar daerah, dan meningkatkan efisiensi serta meningkatkan produktivitas untuk mewujudkan Indonesia maju. Di samping itu, Kementerian PUPR juga mendukung pencapaian Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs sebagai berikut. SDG 6, memastikan ketersediaan dan pengelolaan air dan sanitasi yang berkelanjutan. SDG 9, membangun infrastruktur yang tangguh, mempromosikan industrialisasi yang inklusif dan berkelanjutan dan mendorong inovasi. SDG 10, mengurangi ketimpangan di dalam dan antar negara. SDG 11, menjadikan kota dan pemukiman manusia inklusif, aman, tangguh, dan berkelanjutan. SDG 13, mengambil tindakan segera untuk memerangi perubahan iklim dan dampaknya. Untuk itu, dalam melanjutkan pembangunan infrastruktur ke depan, Kementerian PUPR akan sangat memperhatikan kualitas infrastruktur karena tuntutan dan harapan publik yang semakin tinggi. Kementerian PUPR berkomitmen menerapkan prinsip-prinsip pembangunan berkelanjutan yang secara umum mencakup 3 aspek. Aspek ekonomi, mewujudkan penyelenggaraan konstruksi yang memberikan manfaat ekonomi dan mendorong peningkatan kesejahteraan masyarakat secara berkesinambungan melalui penyusunan program prioritas, efisiensi sumber daya, dukungan terhadap usaha lokal, dan perkuatan UMKM. Itu yang pertama. Kedua adalah aspek lingkungan. Dapat mempertahankan kelangsungan daya dukung dan daya tampung lingkungan melalui penggunaan lahan tepat guna, konservasi energi, konservasi air, manajemen lingkungan, manajemen dan pengelolaan rantai pasok sumber daya konstruksi. Ketiga adalah aspek sosial. Bagaimana pembangunan itu bersifat adil, inklusif, dan mengurangi disparitas sosial, sehingga mengurangi betul-betul ke arah pengurangan kesenjangan sosial. Selain itu, dari sisi regulasi, pemerintah telah menerbitkan sejumlah regulasi dalam rangka penguatan pembangunan infrastruktur yang berkelanjutan. Persatu adalah Undang-Undang Nomor 2 2017, di mana tentang jasa konstruksi yang mewajibkan setiap pengguna jasa dan penyedia jasa wajib memenuhi standar keamanan, keselamatan, kesehatan, dan keberlanjutan. Ini acuannya. Kemudian juga PP nomor 14 2021 tentang perubahan PP nomor 22 mengacu pada peraturan pelaksanaan Undang-Undang nomor 2 2017 tentang penyelenggaraan usaha jasa konstruksi yang harus menerapkan prinsip konstruksi berkelanjutan. Ketiga, Permen PUPR nomor 9 2021 tentang pedoman penyelenggaraan konstruksi berkelanjutan. Bapak Ibu sekalian, 3 hal itu dari aspek regulasi. Di lapangan, bagaimana Kementerian PUPR menerapkan penggunaan rantai pasok konstruksi hijau atau biasa kita sebut Green Construction Supply Chain. Ya. Tolong next ini slide-nya, yang merupakan titik awal pembenahan demi terwujudnya konstruksi berkelanjutan. Bapak Ibu sekalian, Dalam kaitannya dengan perwujudan infrastruktur berkualitas, Kementerian PUPR juga mengembangkan infrastruktur yang tangguh, resilient, bencana sebagai bagian dari mitigasi bencana, baik yang dominan selama ini adalah hidrometeorologi, melalui pembangunan infrastruktur seperti bendungan, embung, normalisasi sungai, dan pembangunan tanggul sungai, pantai. Sebagai contoh adalah tanggul laut, pengaman pantai Teluk, NCICD, tol laut terintegrasi di tol Semarang-Demak, contohnya, Bapak Ibu sekalian. Coba gambarnya mana, slide-nya. Ya. Dalam rangka mewujudkan infrastruktur yang tahan terhadap bencana gempa bumi, Kementerian PUPR bersama 10 kementerian dan lembaga lainnya membentuk Pusgen, ya, yang memiliki tugas utama pemutakhiran peta sumber dan bahaya gempa nasional secara berkala, survei dan analisis kegempaan dan kerusakan pasca terjadinya gempa merusak, serta memberikan rekomendasi. Nomor 3 adalah sosialisasi mengenai sumber bahaya dan resiko gempa di Indonesia. Bapak Ibu sekalian, untuk memastikan bahwa faktor kegempaan diterapkan dalam desain bangunan infrastruktur, para ahli Pusken menyebar menjadi anggota dalam berbagai komisi yang dibentuk, yaitu Komisi Keamanan Bendungan Besar, Komisi Keamanan Jembatan Panjang dan Terowongan Jalan, Komite Keamanan Bangunan Gedung, dan anggota Komite Keselamatan Konstruksi. Dengan demikian, dapat mendukung terwujudnya konstruksi infrastruktur yang tangguh terhadap potensi bencana gempa bumi. Bapak Ibu sekalian, ada hal yang khusus yang ingin saya sampaikan pada kesempatan ini, yang saat ini menjadi sentral perhatian adalah pembangunan Ibu Kota Negara Nusantara di Kalimantan Timur. Pembangunan Ibu Kota Negara memiliki peran utama sebagai katalis peningkatan peradaban manusia. Indonesia dengan didukung oleh 3 pilar visi Ibu Kota Negara, yakni mencerminkan identitas nasional, menjamin keberlanjutan sosial, ekonomi, dan lingkungan, mewujudkan kota cerdas, modern, dan berstandar internasional. Ketiga pilar visi IKN memiliki visi dan tujuan utama menjadi representasi kemajuan bangsa yang unggul, sehingga mampu menjadi contoh bagi pembangunan kota-kota lainnya di Indonesia. Kementerian Pekerjaan Umum dan Perumahan Rakyat telah menyusun dokumen perencanaan yang disebut Urban Design Development, dan juga didukung oleh infrastrukturnya. Sebagai acuan dalam pembangunan Ibu Kota Negara menerapkan beberapa strategi desain, yaitu 1. Transformasi bekerja dengan sistematis dan dinamis, serta menjunjung tinggi kolaborasi dan keterhubungan antar semua pihak. Caranya adalah dengan menerapkan desain kompleks pemerintahan yang terkonsolidasi dan terkoneksi antar bangunan, sehingga menciptakan ruang kolaborasi dengan bisnis, mewujudkan lingkungan kerja yang sehat dan people-oriented, serta high performance green office district. Transformasi bermukim, kehidupan bermukim kota yang kompak, berkinerja tinggi, efisien, dan livable, sehingga mewujudkan hunian inklusif berbasis komunitas. Transformasi mobilitas, bagaimana ibu kota ini didesain berbasis transit, mengutamakan pergerakan cepat, efisien, dan sehat bagi warga kota yang ditunjang dengan harapannya nanti adalah 80% transit transportasi publik, kemudian iklim yang kondusif untuk pejalan kaki, serta mengadaptasi smart transport and autonomous system. Kemudian yang keempat adalah transformasi melestarikan lingkungan, usaha menjaga ekosistem alam dan hidup bersinergi dengan alam, yaitu dengan meningkatkan kekayaan dan keberagaman biota alami, menciptakan botanical garden dan international center for tropical forestry, dan juga bagaimana meningkatkan interaksi nilai-nilai lingkungan dan nilai-nilai luhur Pancasila. Kemudian transformasi berbangsa dan berbudaya, kehidupan berbangsa dan berbudaya melalui ruang-ruang simbolis bersama untuk merayakan kesatuan dan kebinekaan Nusantara, mewujudkan desain ruang representasi budaya Nusantara di panggung nasional, ruang simbol kemajuan bangsa sebagai showcase kepada dunia, ruang perayaan kesatuan dalam keberagaman, dan ruang publik, serta edukasi sejarah. Desain bangunan gedung harus mendukung terwujudnya Future Smart Forest City of Indonesia yang memiliki target Key Performance Indicator yang utama, yaitu Smart Metropolis, Zero Emission City, 80% energi alternatif, 80% transportasi publik, 10 Minute City, 70% area hijau, dan 2 degree pengurangan suhu. Ini Bapak Ibu sekalian adalah key performance indicator yang dijabarkan di dalam desainnya nanti. Dan sudah sedang dijalankan. Perencanaan dan pelaksanaan pembangunan infrastruktur di IKN diharapkan dapat menciptakan standar baru yang lebih tinggi untuk infrastruktur yang berkualitas dan modern di Indonesia. Bapak Ibu sekalian, sebagai penutup, saya ingin menekankan kembali bahwa selain mampu membangun infrastruktur yang tangguh, kita juga harus mampu mengoperasikan dan memelihara infrastruktur tersebut, termasuk lingkungan di sekitarnya. Indonesia memerlukan dan terus mendorong tumbuhnya generasi-generasi muda yang mumpuni di bidang tersebut, khususnya disiplin ilmu teknik sipil dan lingkungan. Akhir kata, saya ucapkan selamat mengikuti rangkaian International Conference pada hari ini. Semoga pemikiran-pemikiran yang dihasilkan dari acara ini akan mampu memberikan manfaat yang luas demi terwujudnya Indonesia yang lebih maju dan lebih sejahtera. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Jakarta, 9 Maret 2022, Menteri Pekerjaan Umum dan Perumahan Rakyat M. Basuki Hadi Mulyono. Demikian Bapak Ibu sekalian, Bapak Moderator, saya telah membacakan speech beliau. Terima kasih atas kesempatan dan waktu yang diberikan. Wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you very much, Pak Danis, who has delivered very important and informative topics that's to be understood by all participants of this conference, and it is very inspiring to all of us. He has explained so many things in this session about vision Indonesia in the future, about resilient infrastructure, and also he explained so many commissions already established, new Indonesian capital city, mobility transformation, environmental sustainability, zero emission, smart metropolis, and so forth. It is very inspiring to all of us. Again, thank you for spending the time, Pak Danis, for attending this conference. Ladies and gentlemen, please appreciate and give applause to Pak Danis. Thank you.
Terima kasih Pak, sama-sama Pak. Terima kasih.
Ya.
Lain Ratno.
Assalamualaikum
Izin.
warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Izin, terima kasih. Sama-sama, salam semua.
Ya.
Thank you very much, Dr. Insinyur Danis Hidayat Sumadilaga, MNSC, who has been very willing to give us the time and who has conveyed the message from Dr. Insinyur M. Basuki Hadi Mulyono, MSc. And thank you very much for Professor Insinyur Indratmo, MSc, PhD, for moderating the session. We would also like to inform you that on Friday, 10th of March, 2022, from 3 to 5 p.m. Western Indonesia time, we also have a session, a side event of SIBE 2022, which is a webinar titled Improving the Accessibility of the Safe Drinking Water in Southeast Asia to Achieve the SDGs, featuring our speakers, Robert Buss, Chair and Supervisory Board, IRC, International Water and Sanitation Center, which has the headquarters in Netherlands, and which will present his session or his thought about SDG Agenda 2030, 8 more years to go to reach the targets. And we also have Ms. Tri Dewi Virgianti, Director of Housing and Settlement, Indonesian Ministry of National Development Planning Agency, will present Indonesian experience in providing safe drinking water. And we will also have Mr. Patrick Lester NT, Chief Regulator of Metropolitan Waterworks and Sewerage System Regulatory Office, who will share his thought about making potable water available, accessible and affordable for all, effective regulation of water, sewerage, and sanitation services in Metro Manila. The session will be moderated by Insinyur Yuniati Zefi, MT MSc PhD, the Water and Wastewater Engineering Research Group from Institut Teknologi Bandung. Ladies and gentlemen, however, before we move on to the next agenda, we would like to welcome you with a traditional song performance titled Imagine and Hipipura, presented by Institut Teknologi Bandung Choir. Please enjoy the performance.
Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No heavenly offers from above only sky. Imagine all the people living for today.
Imagine there's no countries. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too. Imagine all the people living
You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us, and the world will be as one.
Imagine no possessions. I wonder if you can. No need for greed or hunger. A brotherhood of man. Imagine all the people sharing all the world.
You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. Not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us, and the world will be as one. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. Someday you'll join us, and the world will be as one. ke pesta, pesta meriah, ulang tahun kawanku. Semua yang datang bergaya ceria, berdansa dan gembira. Di tengah pesta, lihat si dia, lincah gayanya, dengan masa kini. Ingin hatiku mencium pipinya, tapi malu rasanya. Oh hip hip hura hura, hura hura. Aku suka dia, suka dia. Aku jatuh cinta, jatuh cinta. Dia pun menanti cinta bersemi di hati. Di tengah pesta, lihat si dia, lincah gayanya, dalam masa kini. Ingin hatiku mencium pipinya, tapi malu rasanya. Oh hip hip hura hura, hura hura. Aku suka dia, suka dia. Aku jatuh cinta, jatuh cinta. Dia pun menanti cinta bersemi di hati. Parapa, 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 para, para, para. Oh hip hip hura hura, hura hura. Aku suka dia, suka dia. Aku jatuh cinta, jatuh cinta. Dia pun menanti cinta bersemi di hati. Di hati ada cinta. Oh hip hip hura hura, hura hura. Aku suka dia, suka dia. Aku jatuh cinta, jatuh cinta. Dia pun menanti cinta bersemi di hati. Di hati ada cinta.
That was quite a joyful song, isn't it, ladies and gentlemen? Hopefully with that song, we will be able to be more motivated in listening to the second keynote speaker for today, and to, of course, to motivate us during all of the sessions for today. Well, ladies and gentlemen, let us proceed with our next agenda. I would like to invite you to the fifth part of our plenary session with our fifth keynote speaker for today, Dr. Fuad Bendimerat, Executive Director of Earthquake Megacity Initiative, who will share with us his insights on investing in local urban resilience. This plenary session will be moderated by Professor Dr. Insinyur Krishna Suryanto Pribadi, MSc. Ladies and gentlemen, let me give you a brief introduction of our moderator, Professor Dr. Insinyur Krishna Suryanto Pribadi, MSc. He is a professor at the Faculty of Civil and Environmental Engineering, Institut Teknologi Bandung. He obtained his bachelor's degree from Institut Teknologi Bandung and obtained his master's degree from Université Claude Bernard Lyon, Lyon, France, and his PhD degree from Institut National de Sciences Appliquées de Lyon, Lyon, France. And he is now actively involved in the Construction Engineering and Management Research Group, Institut Teknologi Bandung. Without further ado, I now invite Professor Dr. Insinyur Krishna Suryanto Pribadi, MSc, to moderate the plenary session. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Professor Dr. Insinyur Krishna Suryanto Pribadi, MSc.
Hi, good morning. A very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Very nice to be with you now. And I would like to uh, moderate the sessions of Dr. Fuad Bendimerat. Actually, the presentations of Dr. Fuad Bendimerat will be recorded session. So I would like just to introduce Dr. Fuad Bendimerat here. Dr. Fuad Bendimerat is a founding member and currently the chairman of the board of the Earthquake and Megacities Initiative, which is a non-governmental international scientific organizations. He is very active and also in research, practice, and also in education, and mostly uh, he is behind the global urban disaster risk reduction agenda for more than 2 decades. And Dr. Fuad Benimarat also was the chief scientist at the RMS Incorporation in California, that is Risk Management Solutions. And Dr. Bedimerat also the author of many publications. Among others is the World Bank Disaster Risk Management and Resilience course, uh, published by or produced by the World Bank. Among other, the most important part is the Words into Action Guidebook for local authorities for the UNDRR and the Kit for the Making Cities Resilience. So Dr. Bendimerat is very important person related to the development of the concept of the urban resilience, urban disaster resilience. He has advised many international organizations on in particular on earthquake engineering issues and earthquake resilience. Dr. Fuad Bedimarat actually graduate of Stanford University in civil engineering and his master and PhD, and he was also professional and scientific organization members, including the Earthquake Engineering Research Institute (ERI) and the American Society of Civil Engineers and the Structural Engineers Association of California. Dr. Fuad Bedimerat will be presenting his topic titled Achieving Sustainable and Resilient Urban Infrastructures, which will focus on the issues of how urban infrastructure can be planned and designed for more sustainable and more resilient system as part of the development of urban centers. In particular, he emphasized that urban centers are vital for the well-being of society, and this presentation will introduce the notion of resilience in the context of the planning, design, construction, and maintenance of urban infrastructure. And he will explain that there is significant overlap between sustainability and resilience. However, while sustainability aims to optimize the use of resources, to support the well-being of society and to preserve these resources for future generations, resilience, on the other hand, aims at maintaining post-shock functionality of infrastructure to support urban vital services. Resilience focuses on accelerating recovery of operability of infrastructure to reduce socio-economic and ecological impact as well as downtime from shocks and stresses. So, without due time, I would like to invite Dr. Fuad Benimerat to present his keynote speech on the achieving sustainable and resilient urban infrastructures. Please, organizer, put on the pre-recorded presentations of Dr. Fuad Bedimerat.
Yes, good morning. Good morning. It's a pleasure for me to address such a friendly and knowledgeable audience, and it's also my pleasure to an opportunity to say greetings and give my best regard to my good friends, as well as in Indonesia. I'm honored and privileged to be the keynote speaker for this 4th International Conference on Sustainable Infrastructure and Built Environment, which is taking place in Bandung on the 8th and 9th of March. My topic today is achieving sustainable and resilient urban infrastructure. I had changed my topic. I originally submitted a different topic, but after I looked at the program, I found that speaking about urban infrastructure probably was more relevant and more pertinent to all of you. So my apologies to the organizers. So if you don't mind, I start my presentation now. I'll have in the agenda 5 items to cover. First, we talk very briefly, and I'll talk very briefly about sustainability versus resilience. Then I move to this topic of climate change, which is very relevant, of course, now to infrastructure planning and design. And then I move into like the solution approach to this. So the first 2 items are more like set up the context and the problem statement, and particularly address 2 approaches. One is thinking about infrastructure as a whole system, or what's called whole system thinking approach. And 2, talk about regulations, code, and standard, which of course are very relevant to the audience and also very relevant to the design and planning of infrastructure. And finally, I will give some concluding thoughts. So let me just start first by just very briefly, what's sustainability and what resilience and what common among them or different between them. So, but before I do that, let's go backwards a little bit and just say, well, how are we now? What is the conventional approach to infrastructure planning and design? Like, how is it? What is the practice now? And of course, architect, engineers, planners, and we rely on, I assume most of you are, but we rely on regulation, we rely on code and standards to design infrastructure. And that has been the case. And also underneath this code and standards, there is an assumption that to achieve resilience or to achieve robustness of infrastructure, we base our design parameters on past event. And we say that if we have a good database of past event, then the future is likely to be like the past. And then we design it on that basis. So, and traditionally also for extreme events, earthquakes or major floods, we emphasize life safety, meaning we design infrastructure in such a way that to protect life safety, to protect the occupants or to protect people who are using that particular facility or that particular infrastructure at that time. Okay, and continuous operability or functionality has only been reserved to what called critical or essential facilities. By critical or essential facilities, things like hospitals or emergency centers or things that we need post a major event, and then we design those to higher standards. But as far as a common infrastructure, we design it really for serviceability for every day. And we say that, extreme conditions such as extreme event is too prohibitive, it's too costly to design infrastructure to be operable for extreme event, and it's much more efficient to use it, to use that money or to use this resource to repair post-event. This has been the traditional thinking. Okay, so, but at the same time, we don't really define what are those acceptability criteria for post-event, meaning, let's say the water system goes away, is it acceptable for 3 days or 8 days or 9 days or a week or months? We don't define that. If we lose a bridge or we lose a power, so how long is acceptable for those repairs? So we leave that open essentially to the future. In most cases, we leave that open. So this has been the traditional thing. So what now sustainability and resilience have introduced? So when we introduce the notion of resilience, and again, I'll explain the two differently, but I really like to focus on resilience. We are really pushing the thinking or the vision one step further. So resilience has really to do with post-event functionality or post-event operability. So we're not looking at now how it is operating now, but we are looking in the future to say, so would I be able to use that particular facility or the particular infrastructure after, let's say, a major event? And if not, what will be the consequences? So that really is a notion that resilience brings in. So instead of thinking present time where I'm thinking according to some design standard, I'm looking in the future in terms of questioning this notion of functionality or operability. So the goal here when we talk about resilience is to keep infrastructure systems, let's say transportation or water or power, operating through that event, or at the minimum, minimize service disruption, minimize functionality to some kind of a tolerable period for the users and the community. What's tolerable, of course, depends on the type of services, the type of infrastructure we're talking about, and also depends on the conditions or the spatial and the social condition of the infrastructure. For example, if I say lose a bridge to a flood, and but that bridge, there is another way to go around it and to achieve my transportation, then maybe the tolerable period is long. It could be very long. But let's say we are an isolated community and that bridge is what connect us to our livelihoods or to our schools, then any disruption to the community which is now isolated becomes very, very disturbing. So it depends on those conditions. So that means that when we talk about resilience, we immediately also incorporating into it which community this particular infrastructure is serving and for which purpose it is done, and under which circumstances, those disturbances will cause problems to those communities or to those users. So that incorporated is all this notion of resilience. So for example, we did a study a few years back in Mumbai where we had to look at the water system and what would be the type of interruption in the water system that will be acceptable in general. Acceptable means tolerable by society in general. And we found that timing to be between 3 and 8 days. Meaning in some areas, even 3 days of interruption of water could cause some problems. And if it goes to 8 days, then there could be the start of some significant insecurities among some of the neighborhood and communities, and also some really serious health concerns. So, of course, when we did that study, the operators, meaning the Municipal Corporation of Greater Mumbai, really had no idea about these numbers, and it was a complete surprise to them. I'll explain this a little bit later. Because again, they designed the water system to service every day, but not necessarily look at the consequences of a long-term interruption. So, so I hope this, kind of notion of post-event operability related to resilience and inclusion of, users and operators and society in general is clear to you now. So if I go a step further and see, so what then is the difference between that and what we talk about sustainability, since the really the theme of your conferences is sustainability. And as I explained, resilience is related to recovery. It's related to post-event. So we want to design things and plan for them now in such a way that we minimize disruption and optimize essentially functionality. On the other hand, sustainability, when we talk about sustainable development, has a different really goal. The goal is to really use resources, whether economic, social, or environmental resources, for the purpose of the society, for the purpose of improving the quality of life, the welfare, the safety, but also not only for today's generation, but also preserve those resources for future generations. So that is a difference. So sustainability is not looking at essentially this notion of recovery, but it's looking at more at preserving resources and using them most optimally, in an optimum way. Well, there is, of course, considerable overlap between the two. But, as I said, that overlap is very helpful, but not, we have to also be clear in terms of what the two are maintaining. When we say designing for sustainability, meaning designing to provide safety, welfare, and quality of life, but also to preserve resources, whatever resources we are using for the future. But where we think designing for resilience, then of course some of that is included. But in addition to this, we are looking at post-event, post-major events, shocks and what's called shocks and stresses, and preserving functionality under the shock and stresses. So, that's kind of the key difference between the two. So with that in mind, let's see how can I represent this notion of resilience. So, if I look at it from a standpoint of functionality, which is always, of course, from us, planners or engineers or architects, or we look at an infrastructure system in terms of some kind of a functionality. I'm providing water, or I'm providing water, or I'm providing some kind of a telecommunication system to people, to some users. So, if I say, well, here is a line, this blue line, and this is time versus functionality, and this is a normal operation until something happens, some kind of perturbation, some event, some shock happens, and then that shock causes damage, and then the system loses functionality. And it can lose functionality to the point where, let's say, if I have set up some emergency resilience state, meaning some state here that says, beyond this, I'm in trouble, I cannot really provide my services anymore for a long period of time, I reach a state of emergency, essentially. If I get to that level, then, if I get to that level, then it's, of course, my condition is a very bad shape, and it will take me some time for correcting that degradation. And typically I start recovering, then I don't recover it fully, but there is some other period of time where I do more repairs and more connections and so on and so forth until I can try to gain more and more of my functionality. And if I do the right thing, I may even gain something after some period of time. So what happened here? What's happened is, this lack of resilience has cause a degradation, and if I'm not resilient at all, that degradation is to the maximum. And I gain some period of stabilization, which adds, of course, to the time when I'm away or out of commission, maybe providing only partial, services. And this difference between here and here, when I was when I started and when I am now, is the maximum loss of resilience. So that's a system that is really not too resilient. Now, if instead of that, I say, I want to establish for my system some minimum resilience state, meaning in no cases my functionality has to go below this green, line that is here. Okay, then I have a different system, meaning I have to provide some additional robustness to the system. I have to test my system adequately and test it with respect to the conditions of, stress test it with respect to conditions. And then I may have a new line now of where my new resilience line is. And what I have achieved is essentially I have reduced my downtime. So I have now a minimum duration of degradation. I have elevated my loss of resilience. So I have a minimum loss of resilience, and I can recover, of course, a little bit faster that way. And this way, so it all depends where I put this line inside. Of course, this is schematic, but this is a good way to look at, what is it that I'm trying to achieve when I talk about resilience. This system is called a risk tolerant system. Okay, so let's say that kind of the notion of resilience from, just explaining it very briefly in schematic words. Now, let me move to another topic which is really important for us and for the future. It's really this, everybody's talking about this. Of course, this is a threat to humanity in many ways, but if we look at it just from a standpoint of our own responsibilities as professionals, whether we are, architects or planners or engineers or regulators or operators of, infrastructure, then really what I'm saying here is that climate change is just putting a new challenge for all of us, and a challenge that is not easy, and that will have to keep us busy for a while. So putting things in perspective. So yeah, I'm an earthquake engineer, and I remember when I started my career, not in the 70s, but in the mid 80s, late 80s, all I've learned from earthquake at that time when we were learning, it came really from the early 70s. After the San Fernando earthquake in Southern California, after the Alaska earthquake in 1964, there was a lot of funding coming in to understand earthquakes, and the very first 3D knowledge was coming in the 80s. But you say after 3 decades, when we came to 2000, I think the practice has really reached a level of good performance. We know how to design infrastructure and buildings and things like this for earthquakes, but it took 30 years at least or more. I mean, it took all my professional career, okay, to do that. And I think climate change, which is only now surfacing, it's going to be the same thing. It would take us, all of us, we can't solve that problem tomorrow. It will take another 3 decades. It would take at least, another 2 decades maybe to get really to understand how to design infrastructure and plan infrastructure and construct infrastructure for climate change. I mean, who knows, essentially now, especially for coastal cities and mega cities, and, when we talk about sea level rise and how much threat sea level rise is to infrastructure, for example, so that really is the most pertinent issue I think we'll have to deal with and we'll have to tackle within the future. Okay, and engineers really, I mean, we also have to think about the perspective of what we're educating. So if we're educating, future engineers, future architects, future planners, then we really have to start now in terms of introducing all what we know about climate change and how that impact infrastructure. In fact, if you're interested and this Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, the last report was August 9, 2001. And Antonio Guterres, who is the General Secretary of the UN, as you all know, said this is code red for humanity, meaning we have reached a level of emergency for humanity. And we, of course, know that. And why are we saying that? Because the data is there now to show that, we really are, as human beings, in dire strait of dealing with climate change. For example, the concentration of carbon dioxide is higher now than any times in the last 2 million years. The global surface temperature has increased faster since 1970 than in any other 50-year period. Meaning, if we take 50-year periods, as long as we have data on this, we can see that the surface temperature has increased much faster. The same thing for the global mean sea level. It has risen faster since 1990 than any previous century. And of course, what does that mean? It means that we have more severe disasters, more severe hazardous event, climate-related hazardous events, such as drought, wildfire, extreme floods, precipitation, intense tropical cyclones, and, also aspects that control our ecosystem, which is the loss of the Arctic Sea and the snow cover in the Arctic. So, this is kind of this red light, but, what do we do about it, as engineers? It's really a difficult issue. So why is it a difficult issue? Because if we look at how we design traditionally infrastructure, how we plan it, how we actually issue regulation related to infrastructure design, then it's based on historical data that is pretty much stationary, meaning we know what happens since 1960 in terms of climate, and we know what happens in terms of event, and we rely on this event to develop a stationary state, and then we plan our infrastructure based on the stationary state of data. But with climate change, the rate of change is too fast in the last 40 years and 30 years, as we saw by the data. So the data that we have now, if we take it, is not stationary anymore. And therefore, it's not reliable anymore. So it's changing too fast. So what should I design for? So since the notion of stationarity is embedded in our code and standard, now that we have a stationary system of data, then how do we deal with it? And so what this means for us engineers is not to panic. What it means is that now we have simply a larger uncertainty in terms of what we design for. So in the past, we believed this is deterministic. What is in the code is deterministic. What is in the standard is deterministic. We pass or we don't pass. Now we have to really introduce this notion of risk and risk-based design. And of course, that is a specialized field of engineering, and we have learned it, many of us, and we do that regularly for earthquakes and flood and other things. But for climate change, it's just something that is starting. And so we need to kind of look at this differently. We look at with this in mind, meaning what we're dealing with is not only uncertain, but also we have to worry about how that would perform in the future, for which we don't have really reliable data, especially when it comes to local models. For climate change, regional models are fairly okay, but we don't design on a basis of regional models. We design on the basis of local data and local modeling, and that really is where this data is very uncertain. So what do we do about that? Okay, how do we deal with that? Okay, so the first thing is I'm talking about is system thinking approach. And I think some of you may have read that or even use it, and I'm sure some of you do. But let's review what that means for the sake of everybody, and let's emphasize also how does that apply. And I'll show you some examples. Okay. So in a system approach, what we do is we shift from saying we design this component approach to thinking about the whole system. For example, if I'm designing, let's say, a power generation station, then in the past I know how to design. If power generation station, I design it, I put it in place, and it's working, and I test it, and I'm gone. Okay, but now it's saying about power generation means it links to other aspects. It links to water. It links to technology. It also links to a community, and community counts. It links to some operability that can be put, in question for climate change. Say, for example, a lot of our power plants are coastal. So what, so that thinking system approach, meaning make a shift from this notion that I am designing a component or I'm designing this unit here to I'm designing something within much global environment, much global ecosystem. So in fact, the whole resilience is founded on systems theory, meaning we look at resilience within a system, whether it's like a city or whether it's a community or whether it is a system of let's say healthcare system or something like this. So this is what I term myself moving from design to plan design. Plan design is what compared to design. Plan design meaning I'm now incorporating planning and designing at the same time. When I plan, first I consult. I plan for a community. I plan for some kind of a spatial planning for a region. So I also plan for the future, or sometimes a very distant future. I plan also, I collaborate, okay? And I consult. So this is the notion of plan design instead of just design, okay? So this notion of plan design system approach, meaning thinking differently, thinking from I'm designing something to something that says, no, I'm doing a planning design, or something that has to do also with planning the future, something that has a vision on the future. That means it forces me to do several things. It forces me to first look at interdependence of infrastructure system. If I'm designing again this power system, then I have to look at other systems, water and all the technology that comes with it, and power and distribution for that power, and also how the community is impacted and how the ecosystem is impacted through that. Okay. I'm also forced to look at the notion that we didn't look at before, which is operability and recovery of services in case of hazardous event and climate change. So I have to question that, meaning how much do I want that green line to be? What is my resilience threshold in terms of losing functionality for what I'm providing and for the users and the community I'm providing that over. And that immediately raises social and policy impact, of course. And because of this notion of uncertainty, we're going to move more and more into what called life cycle risk, meaning not only assessing risk now, but looking at risk in the future. And that's also really a new fundamental area of study and research. Okay, and also life cycle cost, because I have to justify that this plan design also has some benefits, some added value to society. So this is really the system thinking approach. It's not only looking at the system, but looking at the whole ecosystem that is around that particular infrastructure that I'm planning or designing. So in terms of methodology, now I have this sketch which seems to be complicated, but in reality it's not. But the way we have done this is this way. Let's say I have all these sectors, that are infrastructure sectors, whether it's transport, water, wastewater, drainage, power, energy, ICT, any strategic facility, anything related to physical environment that I need to be considered to be a part of my infrastructure. The first thing we need to do is, let's say I'm really looking at the water system. I need to do a situational analysis, meaning how it is operating now. What is the condition now? And then take that and then run a diagnosis of it. Run a diagnosis with respect to some resilience indicators that come directly from some hazard vulnerability and climate change risk assessment study. I have some data that already has been done to look at what the hazard and risk factors are, and then I develop some indicators, and then this situational analysis now is subject to this diagnosis. And it's subject to the diagnosis to identify some gaps, and identify also some things that may be good. What are we doing that is good and what are the gaps? And then that's identifying the gaps. I can look at the consequences now or the impact of those gaps and those kind of weaknesses into the system. And that's called a consequential analysis or an impact analysis. And the impact analysis could be on many aspects, social aspect, material aspect, financial aspect, and so on. So I can look at that. I think planners know about this, and this is also becoming a pretty standard process. Then once I have this impact, then I can say, well, I now can develop a new vision for a sustainable and resilient infrastructure or built environment. I can sit down, but that development of a vision involves stakeholders. It involves, those who are representing those particular communities or operators or a whole set of stakeholders that can come in to agree on a consensus kind of vision for that. Okay, so we have to include into this co-design process, and it's very important. I work a lot with, social scientists and planners, and I learned a lot as an engineer. And I'm a big believer now of this co-design process because it provides essentially sustainability. That's really key to ownership. It's key to sustainability and key to people taking ownership over it and providing viable long-term solutions. Okay, so with this, consequential analysis, I'm in good shape now, and then I can essentially provide this objective first of my design and planning and what are the operational objectives I would like to achieve, essentially determining that green light that says a resilient system. And from that, I can develop design guidelines, operability guidelines, maintenance guidelines. And if I do this system, I do this, few times, and it's become pretty standard. We have used this, in fact, at EMI for the last, almost 20 years to look at various systems, this similar type of analysis, situational analysis, diagnosis, consequential analysis, and then planning processes. Okay, so, and then if you finish that, of course, you have to have some kind of resources that you need to figure out who is going to do what and how you're going to fund those things. And that is essentially a regulating factor by which you're going to come up to a solution that is implementable. And everybody knows his role and responsibility into it. And then, of course, you need monitoring and evaluation indicators. So this is kind of what it is. But a lot of time what I found is really there's a lot of training that need to take place. And because these notions involve those stakeholders, and not all of them are at the same level of skills and capacity. So there is always some level of capacity and training, capacity building and training that you need to plan for into this. Okay, so that's kind of the overall flow chart. Okay, so I'll give you some examples. First one is something that is very common, integrated emergency preparedness and response system. Okay, now this system is really pretty much standard, and it really works well. What is it? It really looks at this from a whole set of all the stakeholders, and all the need for response from the site level to the command level, to the strategic level. So if you look at the columns here, first you have the first column which says level of governments, national authorities, local authorities, site response agencies, meaning your firefighters or your response search and rescue team are here. And then it defines what is their role. So you go this way and then it defines here, those are tactical, they're not there to design on strategies, they're there to do the job on the ground. And they should not be really messed up with anything except this. That is their role. You have to take away from them all the aspects that are strategic or operational. Okay, the strategic and operational are also divided. The national government should not be working here or here, it should be working here, meaning coordination and strategy and the association of resources, okay? And the local government should be given the authority and the responsibility for operations. And what type of resources do they need, okay, is defined here. And also what type of authority do they need and how that is. So this system, which is a closed system, it's a fully functional, system that really incorporates all the aspects. And if you do it, it works very well. We know that. And there is also this integrated loop in terms of what tools and what resources and what facilities you need. Emergency operation system, emergency support function, ICS system, command system, emergency operation plan, standard operation procedures, and training exercises. Countries that have this have really made a lot of progress. It's a whole system approach. And if you look at this, it has some governance issues, that are, everything is under some governance process. And then it has all these things that are integrated, which are, my facilities, my equipment, my people, and how the information is provided. So that's kind of a very good example. It's in practice now, and it works extremely well. Okay. Another one is school and educational institution. The World Bank has put in this really good approach to looking at safer, what they call safer and resilient schools. And it has this 8-step process, very similar to what I described earlier, meaning there is diagnosis phase. In this case, they assume that the diagnosis include this situational analysis, meaning what they call the school infrastructure baseline, which is step 1. And then policy, of course, which is associated with governance. And then you do the diagnosis, you go into the analysis phase, which they broke down into the 3 steps: construction environment, financing environment, and risk and resilience assessment, meaning you do some hazard analysis there and risk analysis and for all the risks that are involved, for all the hazards that are involved. And then from there, you come up with a planning phase where you define your intervention strategies and your investment plan and your implementation strategy. Very similar to what I suggest elsewhere, but they put it into the sequential format. So there is a lot of documentation on this. You can go to the World Bank and look at this, and the whole documentation is there, and it's really very good. And there are a lot of examples on it. So for hospitals, it's a little more complicated. We did this study at EMI for the Department of Health of the Philippines a few years back, where we had to look at 200 major hospitals around the country and look at them from 2 aspects. We were asked 2 questions. One is, are the hospitals safe? And again, this is a policy issue. You cannot tell a policy things, no, don't tell me about safety, tell me about something else. We have to define what safety is. Okay. They want to know if a hospital is safe or not, and it's up to us to design criteria for safety. And the second question was, are the hospital prepared for major events? So this was the question we had to answer. And so we developed this flow diagram, which is a conceptual analytical framework for assessment of hospitals. That was in 2012. And immediately we included not only structural indicators, meaning how their buildings and things will perform if there was an earthquake or a flood, but also non-structural indicators, because that's what operations are needed. You need this ventilation systems, you need, gases and power and things to flow. Otherwise, the hospital is not working. And then finally, you need functional indicators, meaning the actual medical, processes and procedures and, how those are being undertaken. So we needed a whole team of engineers, architects, doctors, specialized doctors in infection disease, vector disease, and so on, and develop this tool along indicators for each one of those. And then we have here collected data collection process, then an analysis process, to bring all those indicators together through some kind of an analytical tool. But also this data analysis was informed also by expert opinion, by previous studies. If there was any particular study, for example, about a hospital, we had to look at it, and of course by code and standards. Okay, so how are each of the hospital doing with respect to code and standard. And from this, we came up with two things, not only for the gaps, which is of course one of the main objectives, but also what are the good practices. So we had like a guide or for good practices for hospitals and, for also the Department of Health, which is also very, very useful. And then we had a performance card, essentially, and safety preparedness. So two aspects that they were asked to do with respect to each hospital. And from there, we could provide recommendation and conclusion. So it's essentially looking at the whole system and how that system operates when there are different hazards or stresses and shocks and stresses. Okay, so, you see the thought process is the same, essentially. You always need some kind of a diagnosis and then some form of an indicator for performance, and then finally, some analysis, and from there you come up with your things. Another example is this water system for Mumbai. You don't, of course, see this graph, which is a complicated graph on the right-hand side. It's a set of diagram that shows the different elements into a water system resilience. How do you break down a complex water distribution system from the dams and reservoir to the pumping stations and treatment stations to actually the whole system of distribution all the way to the household, and how each of these elements actually affect community resilience. So we're incorporating directly into it, what does this consequence, that's the impact analysis, essentially. So there are elements, of course, that are similar, and there are elements that we realize when we do this network analysis or this complete system analysis, that they are absolutely prerequisite, okay? And, I just show you some of the recommendations that we provided, which are very broad. These are just, so for example, this is for the Municipal Corporation of Greater Mumbai, which services 20 million people. And this is what we realized, that, the water system really was operating very fine, operation. But if there was a major event, there was a very little redundancy into it. And they really needed some kind of a specific vulnerability reduction program funded for a long period of time, like 10 years or more, in terms of reducing vulnerability to the system for major shocks and stresses. And we realized also very quickly that they could not really, meaning the operator could not guarantee that they would not exceed these 8 days, where was the threshold for essentially a lot of problems surfacing within the community in terms of security and also in terms of health issues. So they had to do a whole new plan for emergency water supply. And then some selected recommendation. And they didn't have a response plan, and they didn't have a recovery plan. Meaning if there's a major event, they didn't just do ad hoc. So we recommended that they have an emergency response plan, a recovery plan, meaning a service continuity plan, that we call it now, and training was an important component, because those operators really they were very good in terms of engineering of every day and operating for every day, but not for major event. They didn't have the adequate skill training for major events, such as earthquakes or major floods or climate change. Okay, so this is just another way to look at the system overall, because if you don't incorporate the users, you're going to miss all this aspect of recovery and supply and water supply, and you'll be very surprised when that event actually takes place. So, all right, here's another example, final example. This is a different study we did at EMI. We did this study for the Asia Development Bank. And the Asia Development Bank was really very concerned about its own survival in a case of a major earthquake in Metro Manila. There is a major active fault that transects Metro Manila, which is maximum magnitude of 7.2. And Asia Development Bank is all in Manila, meaning it has all its eggs in the same basket. So if there is a big earthquake, the Asia Development Bank has billions of dollars of loans and does thousands of financial transactions every day on that same SWIFT system that we are talking about lately in the news. So we have to look really at not only what the Asia Development Bank does, but also how it is serviced. And Asia Development Bank relies on its people. It's a service-oriented institution. And it has a lot of people who are from overseas, expats that work there, and most of their staff, the management staff and the policymakers, decision makers are foreign. So they could easily leave. So we looked at all this aspect of utilities and infrastructure, and looked at what is functional recovery for each one of them. 30% functional recovery, 60% functional recovery, and so on, to provide this picture in terms of what would happen. We also looked at this graph, which is like, which resources would they need at which time in order to speed up the recovery? And you see these things, meaning there are some four phases into the recovery process. The critical phase, which is very short, it could be a week, it could be a few days. This were immediately after the event, and then the crisis management phase, the stabilization phase, and the restoration and recovery phase. And it happens that you really don't need a lot of resources in that critical phase. You need only those people who know. Let's say this green light is a normal resources. For the first few days, actually you just leave people at home and only identify those you need, because otherwise you just complicate your attacks. But quickly the need for resources increases, and then there is a surge of resources taking place at this level. You need a lot of people in order to put things back in place, and those people are specialized, meaning you cannot just call them from the street. They have to be knowledgeable people, so you have to plan for it. Okay? So this whole system approach really help us kind of identify what is it that ADB should do in order to become more resilient. And of course, we learn a lot ourselves through this process, but this is just another example. I can show you more examples, but we don't have time. But you see, I think the message now is that you have to look at not only like the engineering part, the mechanical part, or the kind of the pieces of it, but also look at how does the service take place and what would happen to it. So this impact analysis and this recovery projection is very important. You see, like here, immediately they'll have problems with water supply and wastewater. It could take for 30% recovery up to 3 months to do that. Okay? But these are something that you could actually mitigate for once you know them. Otherwise, you don't really know them. And so we also develop a sheltering in place process for their people and so on, but I'm not going to get into that. So this is like several examples I give for what do we mean by system thinking. Okay. So let's move to another aspect, excuse me, which is very relevant to us, of course, when you come to infrastructure planning and design. Is we rely on regulation, we rely on codes, we rely on standards. And I explained the kind of the shortcomings of the current approach, but I'll go over them one more time so that we can actually review them and start from there into what to do about it. Okay. As I said earlier, most codes, standard and regulation for planning, design, and construction, they do not consider climate change, or very little. If anything is introduced, it's introduced recently, but for most countries, we just still not having those, because it takes time, as I explained earlier. And as I said earlier, those standards assume, the stationarity, the stable climate, the stable, which was true prior to 1960. If you look at the record, the climate was pretty stable. The data was pretty stable. But now, as I said, the rate of change in the climate is very fast. And there's something, this notion of stability or stationarity of data is no more valid. We cannot count on it anymore with the same level of kind of reliance as before. So if anything we need to do really right now to take into consideration this is really to improve code, standard, and regulation to account for climate change. That's an urgent matter, and it would have a major impact. It would really have a major impact. So, because everybody needs us, policymakers need code and regulation and standards, and professionals need code and regulation and standards. And if anything, you know, just the system, everything needs some form of code. And when a major aspect as climate change is not included, then we have a major gap and an urgency to actually take care of that. So, that's a gap that we need to take care of. So what do we do? What do we have? How do we approach that? Well, you know, codes really must have simple guidelines, simple objective. One is limiting the emission of greenhouse gases. We have a lot of knowledge now, in fact, on buildings and how much, you know, and infrastructure and how much, you know, greenhouse gases this, you know, generate. So we could turn essentially at least those into some initial standards. And there are some, of course, you know, we know that we have green buildings or green economy, you know, blue economy, sustainable economy. So but, you know, for infrastructure, we need objective, prescribed, because codes are prescribed. So it's not really just to set things. So we need to turn those into, and the code must also at the preface promote resilience. They must, as a preface, make it mandatory to look at, you know, operability post-event, recovery post-event. You know, it had not been optional. This is currently defined in terms of stress test, you know, for your system. It's, you know, so we're starting to have some of the tools to do this, but they have to become, of course, part of the general standard so that they can actually be included in general practice. And we should also look at this issue of resources, because sustainability has to do that. You know, that has to be some prescription in terms of what to use in terms of resources. We cannot just use resources the way we want. You know, we used to believe as engineers, for example, that what we do is for the common good. You know, we build, you know, huge dams for the common good. But we realize, you know, that's not necessarily true over time. For example, you know, in my state in California, right here, we're going to demolish 4 dams that were built about in the 60s, because we realize now, several decades later, that they're causing more harm to the environment and very little added value to the communities, you know, compared to, you know, so the decision, there's a policy decision to say we need to demolish them. It was a mistake to build them there to start with. Okay, so you know, so that the notion of questioning these things up front, you know, that not everything we do is for the common good if we don't really consult and do this kind of what I say co-design process or design thinking process. Okay, and at the same time, you know, there's something we always forget. You know, that there are always vulnerable communities, and vulnerable communities get like washed away. And they bear the brunt and the cumulative impact of disasters. And so we have to have in our code some reliance or some reference to equity and sustainability. You know, we have to build things in such a way that are equitable to everyone. And that in the long term is what really going to save us. So what does this is means that codes really have become now a long-term collaborative effort. You know, it has to have consultation process into it, but it is urgent that we start that when it comes to climate change and when it's time to introducing this whole system approach that I mentioned earlier. Okay. So there are some resources. Of course, I live in the United States and I have access to, I'm a member of the American Society of Civil Engineers, and there's really some good resources, at least for civil engineers like me, but there are really good references also for regulators, operators, architects and planners. This ASC policy statement 418, 518, this definition, but also manual practices. Those two manual practices are very important. The manual practice 140, which is climate resilient infrastructures, adaptive design, and risk management, which was published by the American Society of Civil Engineers in 2018, and the manual practice 144, which is hazard resilient infrastructure analysis and design. So there are some design criteria there also, and analysis. So those are typically, very cheap or even free for members, and they're really good resources to start. So, so that's so that kind of comes to what I wanted to say. I just want to provide some really final thoughts. We design of that picture inside, for kids for the future, to give them the environment where they can thrive, where they can study, where they can get education, where they can live healthy. And for that, we owe it to them to think our paradigms, to change our paradigm. So I have 4 recommendations, 4 items that I want to leave you with. One is making the paradigm shift, get into the system thinking approach. There's enough there to do that. 2 is pushing new regulation and new standard that explicitly talk about functionality, not only under normal stationary conditions, but also under extreme shocks and long-term stresses. Long-term stress means something like climate change or extreme shock or earthquakes and flood, things like this. So we need to, as I said, this is urgent and important to do. In addition to this, we have to show added value to society, meaning we cannot impose, because operators and owners, they will say, this is costing too much, you're costing me too much, and I cannot do this. So what's the answer? So we have to come up with methods, and that can actually show and demonstrate the added value of resilient infrastructure. Not only talk about it, but I talked about earlier about life cycle risk analysis, life cycle cost analysis. This should be standard. They should be an integral part of our planning and design, not in other things. They should be part of the scope of work that we do. And finally, and again, when we talk about this, we immediately are going into this consultation process and this co-design process. So finally, the same way we made progress in building design for earthquake, we introduced this notion of performance-based approach for buildings. And at that point, really, we made significant progress, because then there is a trade-off between how much performance I want and cost. Okay? But a lot of time, if we understand that trade-off, we're willing to make those decisions, at least for those facilities that we want and we understand are important. And that choice by itself educates everybody. Okay? And that choice by itself helps us and forces us to take uncertainty and define performance criteria into this life cycle analysis. So once we, I think, look at those as goals for term things, then we are on our way to achieve this resilient infrastructure. There are some data that the World Bank has that are fairly convincing. I don't really know, I didn't study where this came from. There must be some reference that the World Bank did. Of course, we know this $1 in investment create $4 in return on that investment when things are resilient. The World Bank says also globally, we can have a net benefit of $4.2 trillion to humanity if we actually design infrastructure to high resilience standards. Okay, 4.2 trillion is a lot of money. Okay. And whereas we also can lose money if we do action by single year, every year, humanity is losing $100 billion. That's according to the World Bank. So I leave you with this. I hope my presentation was informative to all of you. I wish you good luck and success into this very important event. Thank you very much again for the organizers and all my colleagues and friends for inviting me to do this. Goodbye now.
Well, that was a very informative and enriching speech from Dr. Fuad Bendimerat on the sustainable and resilient urban infrastructure. And as we understand that Dr. Bendimerat have already discussed about sustainability and resilience issue, the characteristic of sustainability and resilience, common issues, and also the differences. Where Dr. Bendimerat also mentioned that both are future-looking, but resiliency emphasize more on the post-event operability and recoverability of infrastructure system. Dr. Bendimerat also introduced to us the issue on the developing issues on climate change as an uncharted territory, and he emphasized on the current situation, which is underlined by the statement of code red of humanity, and there are issues actually that need to be considered as in the past or currently, and conventional approaches when we design our infrastructures, we are based on code standards and regulations which are stationary in nature based on the past data. And Dr. Bendimerat encouraged us to look further, yeah, for the to understand the future based on the understanding of that there is a larger data uncertainty. So it is very important that our risk-based design should be tuned toward the larger data uncertainty of the future climate. Dr. Bendimerat also introduced the whole system thinking approach, which is different compared to the past conventional approach in the design of our infrastructures. And in this regard, the system thinking approach is encouraged to use the approach of plan design rather than just design, which require consultations, collaborations with the community, and require us to need to understand the plan, the purpose of the infrastructure for the community and also for the future, and also for the collaborations required to realize this. System thinking approach planning, Dr. Bendimerat underlined the need of the new development visions, which rely or based on the sustainability and resilience approach, and also promoting a stakeholders co-design process. On the regulation codes and standards, as it is considered and as we understand, it is assume stationarity with the past climate knowledge. We need to improve the regulations, code, and standard to account for the climate change and to improve that also during to implement regulation codes and standards, we need to push more approach on questioning upfront in the planning and design process. And finally, Dr. Bendy Merat provoked us with his very profound thoughts on the paradigm shift to system thinking and to push regulation and standard to functionality considerations for extreme shocks and also long-term stresses. Also to start to quantify the added value of resilient infrastructure and sustainable development of our infrastructures. And finally, Dr. Bendy Marat also promote or propose to instill or to start with performance-based approach for our infrastructure design, as has been used in the past or currently for the design of for the earthquake resistance or resilience design of our buildings. So with this, Dr. Bendy Merat conclude his presentations. So I think this is very enlightening, and we need to have a more integrated and also comprehensive look at how we plan our infrastructure system in the future, including the interactivity of the systems as illustrated by the examples by several examples Dr. Bendy Merat showing to us. So with this, I would like to invite all the participants to appreciate and applaud Dr. Bendy Merat, although he is not present currently in this conference due to the time difference, significant time difference between Indonesia and USA. So again, Doctor, we appreciate and thanks Dr. Bendy Merat for a very inspirational speech on the sustainable and resilient infrastructure. So with this, I would like to thank the organizers and give back the floor to the organizer. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fuad Bendy Merat and Professor Dr. Insinyur Krishna Suryanto Pribadi, MSc, for the comprehensive explanation.
Microphone.
Yeah, can you hear me now? Thank you very much.
We can hear you now.
Okay. Is it clear now, sir?
Yes, clear.
Yes.
Thank you
yes.
very much.
Okay.
Yeah, we're having some technical issues right now. Thank you very much for the feedback. Okay, thank you very much to Dr. Fuad Bendy Merat and Professor Dr. Insinyur Krishna Suryanto Pribadi, MSc, for the comprehensive explanation. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we would like to deliver our sincere gratitude to all keynote speakers of the second day of the plenary session of the 4th International Conference on Sustainable Infrastructure and Built Environment 2022. Hopefully, we can take some of the key takeaways and now identify challenges more accurately to solve current and upcoming issues to build more sustainable infrastructure and a resilient built environment. That was the end of our plenary session for today. After this, we will continue the agenda with a short coffee break until 10 past 10 a.m. Western Indonesian time. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let me remind you that the fourth parallel paper presentation session will begin after our coffee break. You may also find that there are links to the rooms of your choice in the program book. You may now download the program book provided by the committee via the Zoom chat tab. Now, please also fill in the questionnaire form provided in the chat tab to give us your feedback regarding the event SIBE 2022. In addition, let me remind you again that on Friday, 10th of March, 2022, we also will have a side event, a webinar titled Improving the Accessibility of the Safe Drinking Water in Southeast Asia to Achieve the SDGs. And for those who would like to watch our first plenary session, which was held yesterday, you may also go to the link provided by the committee in the chat tab or go to FTSL ITB YouTube account. If there are any difficulties, you may ask the committee in the chat tab. And I wish all presenters and participants the best of luck, and I will see you again at 10 past 10. Thank you.
So there is no time for a discussion question. The moderator.
Yeah,
There is no
session, sir.
there is no question proposed to Mr. keynote speaker.
No, yeah, we do not provide the Q&A session because we will give the discussion during the speakers in the paper presentation later.
Oh, okay.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Thank you for your information.
Yeah, you're welcome, sir. Yeah, you're welcome. Got lagi? Yeah. Yeah, please, everyone, ladies and gentlemen, enjoy your coffee break. And I'll see you again at 10 past 10 a.m. Western Indonesian time. Thank you.
Nah, ini kakak punya link kayak itu nggak?
data yang saya terima dari Merauke ke Bovendigul itu jalannya berlumpur masih banyak sekali 2 tahun yang lalu, dan saya sudah perintahkan ke Menteri untuk ini dikerjakan. Jadi dari ini Trans Papua dari Merauke, Sota, kemudian Bovendigul panjangnya 422 km, 78 kilo, tinggal 3 kilo ini yang belum selesai karena ini memang tanah di sini memang khas tanahnya sehingga perlu pengerjaan khusus. Kita harapkan ini akhir bulan ini selesai baik, kemudian sepanjang tahun sekian tahun bisa kita pakai terus ya. Yang sudah jadi kayak apa nanti kita lihat, yang masih di dalam pengerjaan ya.
Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the 4th International Conference on Sustainable Infrastructure and Built Environment 2022. The 4th parallel paper presentation session will begin shortly. You may find Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the 4th International Conference on Sustainable Infrastructure and Built Environment 2022. The 4th parallel paper presentation session will begin shortly. You may find that there are links to the rooms of your choice. If there are any difficulties, you may ask the committee in the chat tab. Ladies and gentlemen, let me remind you that this session will be held until 12 p.m. Western Indonesian time, in which we will have our lunch break. So please click on the Zoom meeting links provided on your screen there. Yeah, or in the chat room, in the chat column. Thank you. Thank you very much, and I wish all presenters and participants the best of luck.